These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy. And it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep a firearm shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. We'll repeal the Second Amendment right now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, top of the Wednesday to you. Judd Legum is going to be with us in about 30 minutes. There's this kind of secret plot that a bunch of corporate executives are hatching to fund traitorous Republicans. We'll tell you all about that at the bottom of the hour. In the second hour, I want to get into my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, the Republican Party's dark death plot to win elections. We saw this played out on television yesterday with Rand Paul and Dr. Fauci, and I'm going to dig into that in some considerable detail in the second hour of our program. In our third hour, I believe it is, Sara Kamali will be with us about homegrown hate. Well, we'll get to that too. But I want to start out with, just basically now that Liz Cheney is canceled, and now this morning Christopher Miller, the guy who wrote the memo saying that the National Guard may not, help or arm or, there was a half a dozen different specific things that he said the National Guard could not do, could not assist the D.C. police. I thought I had it here. Apparently I don't. In any case, the guy who was the author of that memo, he was the acting Secretary of Defense. He was put into place after Trump lost the election. Has basically testified that the reason that he refused to have the National Guard there, when the National Guard had been there when, for example, weeks earlier, Black Lives Matter was holding a protest in D.C. Oh my God, we need the National Guard, it's black people. But when it was Trump-toady insurrectionists, the response was, we don't want them to think that there's a military coup underway, as they're trying to do their own coup. I mean, seriously, think about that for a minute. He has gone full Trumpy. It's like what's happening in the Republican Party right now, and among people who are on the periphery of it, is many of them believe that their fate and future depends on basically sucking up to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an authoritarian. Authoritarians are absolutely brutal. Louise was commenting to me this morning that when we lived in Germany and she read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, and I confess I've not read every word in that book. She did, and carefully and slowly read through the whole thing, and just, as we were living on the soil where it happened. And she said the thing that really impressed me was the absolute brutality and unstoppability of the Nazis as they were coming to power, as they seized power, as they held power. Hitler showing up enthusiastically for the hangings of his enemies, the brutality of the brown shirts, the willingness to just absolutely and utterly destroy people, and the unwillingness to compromise, the unwillingness to have a conversation, the unwillingness to negotiate, the unwillingness to do anything other than, hey, it's my way or the highway. These guys are like the ultimate bullies. So where is this going? Where do you think this is going with the Republican Party? You've got now about 100 Republicans who just signed a letter about, most of them aren't even in office, saying, if you guys don't stop worshiping Trump, essentially, we're going to start our own party. You've got Liz Cheney, for God's sake, the daughter of, a war criminal, Dick Cheney, who was put into office by the Supreme Court, not the voters. And she's coming out and saying something that's actually, I think, quite noble. And I realize there are people who are saying, well, she's doing this because she wants to run for president in 2024, or she's doing this because she thinks that when the Trump passion is purged from the GOP, she'll be the most prominent figure to stand out, and that'll be a big boost for her politically and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that there's a very good chance she's going to lose her seat next year. I mean, if the Trump fever continues until November of 2022, she's up for re-election. She already has a primary challenger who's a Trumpy in Wyoming. These guys only give up when they are totally defeated. And the Democrats and frankly, in my mind, the remaining, shall we say, good GOP, I disagree with them on policy, I disagree with them on taxes, I disagree with them on giant corporations. I disagree with Liz Cheney and her friends on just about everything. But how do you think this thing is going to play out? My take on this is that the only thing that breaks the Trump fever is the loss of Trump. He will not capitulate. He's not, by loss of Trump, it would either be that he comes out and he says, I've looked at things and I actually lost that election. So just move on, guys. You don't need me anymore. It's sort of the way Jimmy Carter bowed out after 1980. Okay, I lost the election. I'm going to go back to the peanut farm. But Trump's not going to do that. He's an authoritarian. He's essentially, at his core, a Nazi. And authoritarians don't back down. Authoritarians push and push and push until they're utterly defeated. Which means one of two things. Either this fever that the Republican Party has is not going to break until Donald Trump, as I said, number one, repudiates his own positions, which ain't going to happen in my opinion. Number two, has the ultimate and fatal cheeseburger, and something, God forbid, physically happens to him. I'm not wishing ill on anybody, including the former president. But he's in his 70s. It's possible. Although I'm thinking 70s not that old. Or number three, and I think this is the key, is that the Democrats, in one voice, basically stand up with some of the Republicans who have been speaking out and absolutely assertively repudiate this. And I was not encouraged by some of the hearings this morning where, again, I was seeing Republicans doing theater and Democrats trying to do, detail. And theater always wins in American politics. But this is what Liz Cheney said. She said, our freedom only survives if we protect it, if we honor our oath taken before God in this chamber and to support and defend the Constitution, if we recognize threats to freedom when they arise. Today we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have only heard his words, not the truth. But he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all. I am a conservative Republican, and the most conservative of conservative principles is reverence for the rule of law, says Liz Cheney. The Electoral College has voted. More than 60 states and federal courts, including multiple judges the former president appointed, have rejected his claims. The Trump DOJ investigated the former president's claims and found no evidence to support them. The election is over. That is the rule of law. That is our constitutional process. Our duty is clear. We must act to prevent the unraveling of our democracy. And then she goes on to say, this is not about policy or partisanship. It's about our duty as Americans. We cannot remain silent. What's going to happen to Liz Cheney? What's going to happen to the Republican Party?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I think most importantly, what's going to happen to America as a consequence of this? I wrote a book about this, the hidden history of American oligarchy. It's a very dark possibility. Or it could be a renewal of America. I mean, that's a very real possibility too. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, the Republican Party, they need to change their name to the Nazi Party, because that's what they are. They're Nazis. They are boycotting, sabotaging people of color and minorities to be able to vote. And the other thing is, this guy, Mitch McConnell, he's the one manipulating all the Republican senators to do the bidding for Donald Trump. This guy has to go. Nobody pays attention to this, but Mitch McConnell, he's the one that's doing all the damage in there. And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you for everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. First of all, I think rather than the Republicans calling themselves Nazis, because obviously that's not going to fly, and they're not going to do that. Probably it might be better for them to start calling themselves Confederates, because that's a label that I think many of them would actually proudly claim, that they are now the Confederate Party, and that we are now the Confederate States of America. We're no longer the United States of America, and the Confederate Party, of course, believes in believes in slavery. I mean, the modern day version of that would be, no minimum wage and bring back racial segregation. And, among other kind of pseudo-Nazi policies. With regard to Mitch McConnell, Alfredo, I'm not convinced that the power behind this is coming from anywhere other than Donald Trump. I realize there are a lot of people who think that Trump has been marginalized, that he's kind of gone back to Mar-a-Lago, that he's just sitting there being quiet and all this kind of stuff, and makes some money in the real estate business, whatever. And that, he's very, very busy dealing with dozens of lawsuits against him, ranging from women who he is alleged to have raped, to investors and other people who he is alleged to have ripped off, to a whole bunch of government agencies that are accusing him of crimes. But I really believe that that's where the power for this thing is coming from. I think it's coming out of, basically two sources. Number one, Donald Trump. And number two, you've got a couple of foreign governments and their bots and trolls who are doing everything they can to stir up people in the United States against each other. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to promote this theory that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him by the evil Democrats, or the evil Republicans for that matter. And that you can't trust American democracy, and you can't trust our elections. And the electoral system was rigged. And I mean, this is something Trump has been saying since 2015. Remember in the primaries? He lost one of the primaries. I think it was New Hampshire. And he was like, oh, yeah, it was rigged. I mean, every time he loses, he just says the election was rigged. When he wins, hey, it's good. Nothing rigged. Isn't this enough for people to figure out what's going on? Anyhow, we'll be back. Stick around. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. I do want to pick up your phone calls and get your thoughts on this. Is there something I'm missing here? It seems to me pretty clear it's in the GOP. It's pro or con Trump. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Thom Hartmann here, back with you. Over 100 Republicans, including former Republican officials, threatened to split from the GOP. Miles Taylor, the guy who was inside the Trump administration, remember Anonymous published that thing back in 2017, I believe it was, saying, don't worry, there are some of us here working to thwart Trump's fascist agenda. We'll take care of him. And it turned out it was a guy named Miles Taylor. And he also, they turned it into a book. Oh, it was 2018 that he wrote the op-ed. And he said, the letter says, this is us saying that a group of more than 100 prominent Republicans think that the situation has gotten so dire with the Republican Party that it is now time to seriously consider whether an alternative might be the only option. These are people who were once governors, who were members of Congress, who were ambassadors, who were cabinet secretaries, who were state legislators, who were Republican Party chair people. He has not named the signers. Reuters has reported that Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania, Christine Todd Whitman of New Jersey. We'll see. We'll see how this shakes out. But this is what's going on. And the survival, I think, of the Republican Party, I mean, just for example, this is how bizarre it gets, right? A Trump-loving Republican is trying to push through a bill, I'm not making this up, is trying to push through a bill that fact checkers can be fined $1,000, basically if Republicans don't like what they say. I mean, that's how insane this is. And then we've got this group of military, retired generals and admirals, 124 of them. They just released a letter saying that Joe Biden stole the election. What's happening is that, billionaire Murdoch family, Fox News, and the other right-wing media that are continuing to promulgate this lie that Donald Trump won the election to justify overturning state laws about how elections are conducted so that in the future Republicans can, install their own toadies and bring in their own election monitors, thugs, goons, to intimidate people. That the media organizations that are promulgating these massive lies have succeeded in convincing 124 retired generals and admirals. And this, runs this is from a group called Flag Officers for America. And they are total Trumpies. And they're selling this lie that the presidential vote was rigged in Biden's favor, and that we are, quote, in deep peril from a full-blown assault on our constitutional rights. Under a Democrat Congress and a current administration, they say our country has taken a hard left turn towards socialism and a Marxist form of tyrannical government, which must be countered now by electing congressional and presidential candidates who will always act to defend our constitutional republic. In other words, Trumpies. So the GOP is like splitting itself right now into pro-Trump and, you know, pro-democracy, I guess, pro-American factions. And it looks like the pro-Trump faction is winning out. Now, I think that you're going to see the pro-Trump faction also, you know, win a whole bunch of primaries next year. As we move into the primary season, it'll be the last couple months of this year and the first 3-4 months of next year, depending on the state and the region and all those kind of things. And as the Trumpies start winning these primaries, it's going to seem like, oh yeah, Trump is really, you know, ascendant, and isn't that wonderful? And Trump, you know, blah-de-blah, from the Republican, you know, from the Trumpy Republican point of view, the fascist Republican point of view. My prediction is, though, that those hyper-Trumpies are going to lose to Democrats, particularly when the Democrats are progressive Democrats, and they can activate the Democratic base, which is broadly progressive. And I think Congress, I think the 2022 election is going to be a wipeout on behalf of the Democrats, and that's going to take some steam out of the GOP sails, or it's going to provoke them to even greater violence. And if you go back and read, you know, Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, what you get is that it's absolutely going to provoke them to greater violence. That they are going to do everything they can to tear this country apart, to reestablish an oligarchy, to reestablish racial segregation, to reestablish the Confederacy. I mean, the lost cause has never died. Or am I missing something here? Give me a call. Let's talk about this. Oh, actually, Judd Legum is going to drop by in just a few minutes, and we'll continue our conversation in about 10 minutes on the other side of my conversation with Judd. Stick around.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if you're on hold, hang on. We will get to your calls.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot. Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. this highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. Hey, welcome back. Judd Legum is on the line with us. He publishes this extraordinary newsletter. We've profiled it before. Popular.info is the website for it. And in fact, Popular Info is the title of the I guess newsletter or daily publication. Judd's Twitter handle is at Judd Legum, Legum. And Judd, welcome back to the program. I understand that you have been on this story for quite some time, and just doing a spectacular job of it, about how these corporations initially after January 6th was saying, oh my God, it was an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. We've got 147 members of Congress who are basically, supporting treason. We can't send money to them anymore. Things are changing, though, I understand.
Yeah, and this is something I've been hearing about kind of through the grapevine for a while, but I got my hands on some video and some other documents from a group called the National Association of Business PACs, which, believe it or not, is actually a trade association for corporate PACs, where they get together and talk about what they'd like to do. And in March, there was a webinar which I was able to review, where very candidly, with the help of a former Republican operative and crisis communication consultants, they walk through the strategy of how, if you've previously said that you're going to suspend your donations to these Republicans who voted to overturn the election, how you can restart and kind of deal with any fallout or pushback. So it was a very candid conversation about, just exactly how to go about this process and really encouraging them to do so.
Yeah, and what I got out of both reading your newsletter, which I subscribed to, and listening to the audio, was that essentially what they were saying, what these crisis managers and whatnot were saying, was kind of the old, rip the Band-Aid off, rip the scab off kind of thing, and just get it done with right away. That if you just jump in and go back to making the donations, and somebody hassles you about it, say, yeah, we just decided to make a change. You'll have one day of bad news cycle. It will then pass. Everybody will forget. Your investors won't care. In fact, they'll be happy that you're now bribing the appropriate politicians to get the things, the tax breaks and things that you want, deregulation that you want. And so just, rock and roll here. Number one, am I characterizing that accurately? I realize rather, my language might not be exactly what they said. But and number two, are we seeing these corporations actually start to support the traders again?
Well, I think you got the general thrust right, Tom. But he did.
Judd? Judd, your audio just disappeared. I don't know if you accidentally hit the mute button on your phone, but if you can hear me, I can't hear you. And I don't know where Judd, you want to try it again? Just say something. I am not hearing Judd. I'm going to put Judd on hold so Joyce can talk to him. He's on line 10, Joyce, as I guess you know. And I mean, this is a pretty amazing thing when you think about it, that these companies, for about a month or two or three, actually, it's up to the fifth here, that these companies took what appeared to be for a while a principled stand. Yes, we are going to fight this. We are going to speak up for democracy. And then, not so much. Anyhow, while we're waiting to get Judd back, Steve in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for bringing up this issue of where we are headed. And sure. I could recommend to your wife and everyone who's interested in reading about how Hitler and his boys took over this other book nonfiction called In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson. It's about the U.S. ambassador to Germany in Berlin with his family and how they gradually realized the horrors of Nazism. Now, getting back to your question, I can be a social chameleon, so I talk to Trumpers, and they think I'm one of them. And I hate to say this, but a percentage of Trumpers are winner-take-all uber bullies, and they have already started what they see as Confederate Insurgency 2.0. And these are hunters, loggers, people who see killing other things as fun and sport and necessary. And many of them have said to me that progressives like us are like what a religious fanatic during a holy war would describe infidels and non-believers. In other words,
we're the prey. They're the predators.
Right. We should be eradicated.
Yeah, I get it. Steve, I got to run because Judd is back on the line here. But thank you for your point and thanks for the reference. I appreciate it. Judd, you've just vanished. Phones are funky things these days. So as you were saying, are these companies now following this advice that they should just get back into the game?
Right. That's just what I was getting to before the technical issues arose. But yes. What we've seen so far, we've seen 1 quarter of campaign finance returns since the insurrection on January 6th. And in that first quarter, we really didn't see too many companies start to give money back to this group, to the group of the 147. There were some exceptions. Cigna was an exception. T-Mobile was an exception. There were a couple of exceptions, but if you look at the broad swath, there's about 1,100 of these corporate PACs. Only a couple of dozen, most of whom you wouldn't have even heard of, resumed. But, and this is also in the documents that I got from this Corporate PAC Trade Association, they did an internal survey. And in the internal survey, it said that of the companies that paused, about half were planning. Now, this may be wishful thinking on behalf of the Trade Association, but this is what they say the survey said. About half were planning on resuming donations after the first quarter. So,
which we're well into now. The first quarter ending in the end of March.
Ending in the end of March, but we haven't yet seen it really any campaign finance reports from that period of time. So we're not going to have a full picture of what's going on until probably the summer, although we'll start to get little bits each month. But only everyone has to file it in the middle of the summer, and that's when we'll really know. So I think you're likely to see a lot more companies at least try to dip their toe in. But
is there any indication, Judd, that some of these companies, Liz Cheney has just staked her flag in the ground, and she's not going away, and she's going to continue speaking out. You've got 100 Republicans on the one hand who have just come out, former senior administration officials and Republican officials and elected officials coming out and saying, we've got to stop the big lie, we've got to reject Trumpism, we've got to move forward as a party. And then on the other hand, you got 124 retired military coming out and saying that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. We need to follow Donald Trump right into the insurrection void. Do you see that kind of cleavage happening with these companies? Are there going to be companies that are going to start supporting Cheney and the, shall we call them, classical Republicans, and others that are going to be supporting the Trumpy Republicans? Or are they just trying to be totally apolitical? We don't care what your politics are, just so long as you vote for our tax breaks and our deregulation.
Yeah, I think this is mostly about power. I think that most companies would like to stay out of this. Certainly, you've seen more people in the first quarter donate to Republicans like Cheney because they hadn't. There were a bunch of companies that hadn't pledged to cut them off because Cheney didn't vote to set aside the election results. But my sense is, and it was really confirmed by looking at this video and these documents, is that What this is about is access. So you put this money in, and it's one of the things in their toolkit to get a relationship with that member of Congress.
There you go. And if you want to read the whole story, it's all over at popular.info, Judd Legum's newsletter. Judd, thanks so much for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Thanks.
Yeah, keep up the great work, too. Popular.info. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls right after this. What are all the pieces that you're seeing here? And welcome back. George in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, George, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Hartmann. I just wanted to back up what you were saying. Somebody else called and said the same thing about the Confederate states rising again, save your Dixie cups. So it's like, I caught something on the news just a couple of days ago, and you probably heard it. It's like a GOP official or representative. You have a radio on in the background. I'm doing other things. When he called an African-American woman who was questioning him about something, and she wasn't yelling at him, she wasn't insulting him, and in the most absolutely mocking tone of voice and arrogance, he said, "Don't worry about it, buckwheat." Who gets that?
I caught that. Yeah.
Buckwheat. Me and you are the same age, Don. We both know that goes back to the Little Rascals from the 1940s, which they were still playing in the 1950s when we were boys. And, that was the African-American child in the Little Rascals, Buckwheat.
Yep.
I mean, that was that whipped my head around more than he could say the N-word. And that was open in an open forum. And these people aren't racist.
No. Racism is their coinage. I mean, I think that's the biggest part of the story that gets ignored, is that this is the rise of the Dixiecrats, only on the Republican side. I mean, that racial hatred or racial fear or all of the above, racism, let's call it, is the principal animating force in today's Republican Party. And we've seen now 2 studies done. The last one was just released a couple days ago, showing that the majority of the people now who have been arrested for attacking the Capitol, we don't know all the people who were there, but we've got about 400 that have been arrested. The majority of them came from those counties in the United States that were in the top percentile, the top chunk of counties that were seeing their white populations diminish relative to populations of color in the last 5 or 10 years. And it's white fear, it's white flight, it's it's white hate, it's racism, whatever you want to call it, George.
Yeah, and this is why, another reason too, we talked before, is why as a liberal, I still think it's misguided that there's a fanaticism towards awful evil firearms we need to disarm, and you just have group hugs. And like that guy pointed out about the thing from Cologne, Germany. It just seems foolish to disarm in the face of evil. Yes, we need gun laws. I agree with you on many things you say about common sense, gun safety, and things. I don't disagree with you. But no, there's a fanaticism going that simply I can see it building, and it's a fanaticism. Yeah. If we just got rid of all these things, we're safe. No, you aren't. How safe were the Jews of Germany? Yeah. So, that's my point.
There were a lot of armed Jews who were mowed down just as easily and readily as the unarmed Jews. But I don't think that we're facing, at the moment, a government that's coming after us. What in particular, people of color in this country are facing are armed white racists. And, I can't argue against arming yourself. I would throw all kinds of warnings in there. The bringing a gun into the house means the greatest probability of an event happening is accidental injury or death, child death, suicide, those, all those things. Do it right, do it well, do it carefully, keep it safe. But I'm not telling people not to be armed.
Thank you,
George,
Tom.
thank you for the call. Yeah, good talking to you. It's an amazing time. 49 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Hartmann here with you and Cheryl in Studio City, California. Hey, Cheryl, what's up? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Yes, thank you for doing it. I just want you to defog your rose-colored glasses a little bit. Here's the thing. I thought when the head of the Hydra was cut off after this election, I knew it wouldn't go away because I knew he had infected, quite every facet of the government and, a large amount of the citizenry. But I thought maybe the chicken would, the body runs around for a while and it collapses. Well, that's not happening. So here's what you said yesterday about, what you're talking about with the Republicans, what's happening with the party. Unless we do something radical, like pass the Voting Rights Act, everything you said doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the severe right wins the primary, and the state governments have control of the election. It doesn't matter. We're going to lose it anyway because they're going to steal it. So we have the Democratic sort of delusion is that we're talking to people that are capable of self-reflection. We've been doing for most of my adult life. I've heard, well, no, the Republican Party is going to have to look within, and they haven't done it, and they're not going to do it because they always fail upward. They breed a new version of crazy, and when a fire is consuming your house, which is what's happening right now, metaphorically speaking, does the fire department show up and negotiate with the fire and say, could you please burn it in an orderly fashion in the bin? No, they extinguish it. I would like Joe Biden to walk into Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema's office, and also Dianne Feinstein's, and pick them up by the lapel, LBJ style, shake them, and say, get on board, get rid of this filibuster, and let us get something done.
I'm with you, Cheryl.
We're way past polite.
Yeah, no, I am completely with you. And if we don't pass the For the People Act, and ideally also the John Lewis, Voting Rights Act, and the George Floyd Police Reform Act, although that's not so central to democracy itself, it's just like survival for a lot of people. But if we don't pass at least the first two of those pieces of legislation, we have no democracy. And yesterday on MSNBC, I believe it was Chris Hayes' show. It might have been it might have been Ari Melber. It was one of the shows during the day. I was working on today's op-ed for Hartmann Report, and sort of watching it in the background. And he had on a former Republican consultant who's still a Republican, but he's a never Trump guy, and a Democratic consultant. And the former Republican consultant said, well, here's what Democrats need to do. Democrats, you've got this problem. You're 50-50. You got Joe Manchin, all this kind of stuff. You're not going to end the filibuster. So what you need to do is just absolutely kick ass in the 2022 elections, increase your majority in the House and Senate, and then you'll be able to get these things passed. And then they turned to the Democratic consultant and said, what say you? And he said what I've been thinking, and essentially what you just said, Cheryl, which is that if we don't pass this stuff now, the 2022 election is going to be stolen in a bunch of states that are setting it up to do it right in front of us, right in front of our eyes. They're passing laws that say that if the Georgia House of Representatives believes that there was, quote, any little bit of fraud in, for example, Fulton County, Atlanta, then they can just disregard those votes and say, we're just going to take a couple 100,000 of those votes and throw them out. We're not going to consider them. Or as Doug Ducey did in Arizona yesterday, he signed legislation to throw 140,000 people off the voting rolls, including 30,000 Latinos. Oh, yeah, let's just, most of these people are in Maricopa County. Let's just get rid of them. And this, they are setting up the 2022 election right now. And if the Democrats don't take this seriously, if Joe Biden doesn't take this seriously, if Kamala Harris doesn't take this seriously, and most importantly, if Chuck Schumer doesn't take this seriously, and I'm so tired of hearing him read these well-thought, carefully written speeches. I want to see a little Jim Jordan coming out of these people. As much as I dislike Jim Jordan, a little Matt Gaetz, please. A little performance art, because without that, I just think we're toast. I just think we're toast. And Cheryl, you said it very well. Cheryl, I got to move on, but thank you. John in Danville, Illinois. Hey, John, I got a little less than a minute to the end of the hour. You got a quick one?
Oh, yes. Liz Cheney drew the line in the sand and said, okay, Democrats, y'all need to get together and put these people out of office and in jail because they are treasonous. And the treasonous, it all goes all the way back to Lincoln and Grant when they let them guys go. And now they quadruple. They quadruple they strength. And they will kill us just like the pandemic. They are trying to put genocide on American people, because if Mitch McConnell had it happen to him, it would have been mass murder at the Capitol and representatives and senators locked up on the Democrat side if McConnell was in office.
Yeah. Well, I'm not, I can't say that about McConnell, but certainly with Trump. I mean, they were ready to kill. They were trying to hang Mike Pence and assassinate Nancy Pelosi, and they were open about this. And God only knows who else they would have killed if they had the chance. And now the Republicans are including death, in my opinion, in their election strategy. I'll tell you about that after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Threshold, the Progressive Plan to Pull America Back from the Brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions. When hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power,
The first fuels the second, by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative president, John Adams, called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink. So far, the fear is really a deep problem for democratic self-government. And then
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So the op-ed I wrote today and published over at HartmannReport.com was titled "The GOP's Dark Death Plot to Win Elections." And basically, you know, I've been talking about this for some time on the air, but I wanted to put it down on paper so that, you know, people could read it and share it with others and just be very, very clear with it, that authoritarian Trump followers are actively promoting death and disease among Americans to win elections. And that kind of brutality and cynicism, in my opinion, is absolutely breathtaking. I talked yesterday in some detail about, you know, strategy number one that the Republicans have been employing since 1980, since Paul Weyrick's speech in that Dallas church about how I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by the majority of people, and they never have been. You know, our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down. Okay, we talked about that yesterday. And Governor Ducey did that in Arizona, throwing 140,000 voters, including 30,000 Latinos, off the voting rolls. But the second and most evil part of their strategy, at least evil in the context of human life, you know, has to do with the coronavirus. And their logic goes something like this. Number one, convince enough Americans not to get vaccinated that the country never reaches herd immunity, and therefore President Joe Biden can never get the virus under control. Number one. Number two, the failure of Biden to control the virus will mean, like what happened to Trump, that the economy will not get back to full functioning either. Number three, as any first-year political science student can tell you, the biggest single variable in most elections is, especially federal elections, is the economy. So if Republicans can keep the economy off balance by keeping the virus circulating, they'll have a much better chance of winning elections in 2022 and 2024. All they have to do is run ads complaining about the Biden economy. And if they can crash the stock market in the process, they get double bonus points. I mean, this strategy has been aggressively supported by right-wing media. It's why about half the Republicans in the U.S. in the Congress, and mostly in the House of Representatives, refuse to say whether they're vaccinated or not. It's why Trump and Melania took their vaccines in secret when they were in the White House. Tucker Carlson, who refuses to tell us whether he's vaccinated or not, has been asking questions about people who died after getting vaccinated. Similar lies being pushed by Ron Johnson. People are not dying after they've been vaccinated. I mean, people die, and say, you know, across America it happens. People die after they eat mashed potatoes, not because of the mashed potatoes, but hey, you know, somebody dies on Thursday. What did they do on Tuesday? Oh, they had mashed potatoes. That must be the cause. Oh, they got their vaccine on Tuesday. No. And you've got these right-wingers and conspiracy nuts on radio, on television, across the internet, on Fox News, spreading these freakouts about the vaccine. You know, Bill Gates is putting tracking chips in them so he knows where you are all the time. Don't tell him about cell phones and GPS. mRNA vaccines are going to alter your DNA and turn you into a zombie. Right. Or a mutant. Or maybe make you a liberal. More than one Republican senator in the rants yesterday, I think, was trying to just produce a Fox-worthy clip, you know, as in worthy of being on Fox News, not Jeff, saying, well, we don't need vaccines, we're already immune, right? Well, Fauci already shot that one down. Even if you've already had the wild variant of COVID, you can still get the South African variant. And apparently you can still get the Indian variant because they share a lot of the same mutations. And you can still die from them, even if you've had the disease. The vaccines, on the other hand, give you a significant level of protection, not 100%, but a significant level of protection against these variants. And then you get this thing where Rand Paul yesterday was trying to promote this idea that somehow Fauci was involved in this program with the Chinese to create nasty weapon viruses years ago. What he's trying to do, what Rand Paul is trying to do, basically, is discredit Anthony Fauci and Joe Biden's entire public health team. Now, why would he want to do that? Because if you can keep the virus circulating, you can keep the economy soft. If you can keep the economy soft, then you get reelected. You heard, I mean, this was Julio's parting point yesterday. Stock market's going to crash, you mark my words. Well, yeah, stock markets go up and down. Is that going to drive the economy, though? Is the economy going to get better or worse? A lot of that is going to depend on whether or not we can deal with this virus. I mean, we're now down below 30,000 people a day getting infected. We're below 400 people a day dying. Compare that to when Trump was president, when we were getting 200,000 people a day infected and 3,000 people a day dying. I mean, no matter how hard Rand Paul and his Republican colleagues try, we're not going to get back to those terrible numbers, but they can if they can convince a large enough, chunk of Republican followers, of Fox News followers, of right-wing hate radio followers to be afraid of or skeptical of the vaccine. They can keep those people getting sick, dropping out of the workplace. They can keep other people afraid of going into workplaces or into retail venues where these mask holes might be hanging out, and they can keep the economy disrupted. And as long as they can keep the economy disrupted, they can use it as a wedge issue, and they can say, hey, what did Joe Biden do for you? Now, this morning we had Liz Cheney ousted. We're talking about that, and I know I've got a bunch of calls on that. We'll pick that up in just a second. And yesterday we saw this performance by Rand Paul, with Anthony Fauci and a few other Republicans, basically trying to promote this idea that there's something weird going on here. Don't trust the Biden public health team. Don't trust the vaccine. This is their sales pitch. And they're doing it to try to win elections, which is the most craven. You've got these two strategies. Number one, screw up the economy and screw up the administration to win with a disease that kills people to win the election. And number two, change the laws in those states where you have the ability to change the law so that you don't even have to count the votes of people who vote Democratic. So that in Georgia, they can look at Fulton County and say, there were 150,000 votes for the Democrats, but, we have some suspicions about those votes. So we're only going to count 60,000 of them, which, by the way, bingo, hey, means the Republicans are in charge now. The Confederacy is hanging on by its teeth. It has been fighting for its lost cause since the failure of Reconstruction with the Tilden Hayes election of 1876. when the political parties got together, the white people in the political parties got together and decided that they would stab black people in the back, both metaphorically, politically, and in some cases even literally, and end Reconstruction, and cut the Confederates some slack. Just like the Republican Party today is cutting Donald Trump some slack. And, you know, we didn't resolve the Confederate problem. In fact, we ended up with Confederate statues in the 1920s. I'm very concerned we're not going to solve this one either.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
If we don't put this whole conspiracy theory down clearly, if truth doesn't prevail, we're in big trouble. And welcome back. Whew, what a day, huh? Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Morning, Tom. Yeah, the gullible dumb have been made to believe something, and they're blaming the wrong side for what they've been trained to blame the left for what the right's been doing to them. Anyway,
specifically,
well, all of it. But you know, I want to get back to your pickup line this morning. The so-called, you know, the conservative, the white power killer conservatives, I call them now, have become ham-handed and desperate, and people can see right through their weak attempts at hanging on to power, and they've been reduced to a minority of two factions, which in reality I think are probably about 20% of the voters, made to look like 40% by the slant media. And those two factions are the manipulating, subsidized, and overly comfortable rich, and the gullible dumb that they pander to. The uninformed that drink and ingest the rubbish that they sell every day of the week. And that's really what they have to realize. They're mad at the wrong side. And I think we better start identifying as the radical center. I haven't called myself a liberal in 5 years at least. Liberal is a Republican word. We have to remember that. The left, liberal, that's all developed. They're semantics geniuses, these guys. And we've got to start seeing through the semantics.
Yeah. I don't think that we need to re-language ourselves, Zach. I don't think it's possible. And I think that just like Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich made the word conservative acceptable again, I mean, the word conservative from Barry Goldwater's defeat in '64 all the way up until the mid-'90s, early 2000s, but particularly the mid-'90s, the word conservative was a word that Republicans were afraid to use because it harkened back to Barry Goldwater. You know, we went through that with liberal and progressive from the 90s, from the Clinton election, you know, arguably through the end of the Obama presidency. And I think that those words have regained their potency. And I don't care, frankly, what Republicans think about it. And I don't think that for most swing voters, there may be a very small percentage of Americans. I've seen numbers that suggest it's probably in the neighborhood of 4 to 10% of Americans who kind of make up their mind at the last minute and don't really pay attention to the news, and they just go with whoever's got the best ads and all that kind of thing. And sometimes they do swing elections because they're just like, you know, the ones that are the easiest to influence at the last minute, and you dump all this money in the last month or so. But most of these people who identify themselves as independents are actually either Republicans or Democrats. Most of them are actually Republicans these days. But and during the time that it was embarrassing to be a liberal, they were down. But I don't think that they're up for grabs. And I don't think that we have to worry.
Also, we got
socialism is another word. Socialism is a word that I don't think Democrats should be using, frankly, and they're not. And you know, it's
socialism or bottom-up socialism. Which one do you want? I mean, we've been doing this for a long time already. You know.
I think the way to use the word socialism is to always follow it with 3 words: for the rich, and then use that to describe so many of the policies that the GOP is promoting and just kind of turn it around on them. Zach, I got to run, but thanks for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 1 minute. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's up?
Hello, Tom. How you doing? I just wanted to talk about, I guess, I'm just going to say this bluntly, that Trump would have done us a favor if he would have died of coronavirus last year, especially with what happened with the insurrection on January 6th. He would have done us all a favor if he croaked last year, because he's been very toxic to the Republican Party and to democracy in general. He's a little Hitler in making. I just think that the media needs to wake up to the fact, and most people need to wake up to the fact that we're almost like Turkey. We almost had a coup d'etat. Or auto or whatever you want to call it on January 6th. And we need to take this threat by Donald Trump seriously and not blow it up as, the ravings of a crazy person, because this crazy person is in charge of the Republican Party. It's just, I never thought that would ever happen, that a loser president would still, even though he's talked to the Republicans and lost them the midterms and the presidency and the Georgia special election, why are the Republicans still clinging on to him, especially with the whole polling data that they have, that Liz Cheney, I guess, is acting upon that and saying, we need to distance ourselves from Trump. I don't get it. That was their opportunity to go, oh, man, Trump's a loser. He's toxic. Let's dump him in the river. Why are they still going with him? I don't get it.
Well, because the base is still with him, and the base is still with him because right-wing media is still with him. We have right-wing media in this country that is basically fascistic, that does not believe in democracy, that is doing and has been for years, doing everything it can to sabotage democracy in the United States. They don't believe in the American way of life. They want to see America turned into Hungary or Russia or a country, the Philippines, whatever, pick your authoritarian country. They are themselves authoritarians. Rupert Murdoch has done everything he can to damage democracy in Australia, in the United Kingdom, and now in the U.S., and he's been very, very successful. He's been called out by Malcolm Turnbull. He's been called out by Kevin Rudd, 2 former prime ministers, a conservative and a progressive, essentially, to use our language. But it continues, and it's obviously it's not just the Murdoch family. It's also we have a whole series of these people. So anyway. Dan in Newark, New Jersey. It says you disagree with me, Dan. Tell me what you disagree about. The virus?
I read, you're a great writer. I always enjoy reading your stuff, by the way. But this time I have to disagree with you.
Okay.
I said I have to disagree with you because you were saying about the coronavirus that the Republicans are using it to beat down the economy at the present, if I understood it right.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much, if you follow the last election, the presidential one, if you watch CNN every day, they had a death count on the TV every day. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I don't understand is you're accusing them, and believe me, I voted for Biden, whether you want to believe me or not, because I got tired of all the nonsense. But you're accusing them of doing exactly what the Democrats did in the last election. Do you see
I'm
that?
accusing whom of doing what? The CNN was keeping track of the deaths because the deaths were increasing. We were number one in the world in deaths. We still are, and India is starting to catch up with us now. But
that's all I saw though on the election, Tom, was coronavirus. There's coronavirus.
That's because that's what was going on. That's because for months Trump had been trying to push people back to work, trying to essentially, in some cases, even he used the Defense Production Act to force meat packers back to work. He was trying to get people back to work because he was trying to get the economy back to normal so that he could run on a successful economy. He wasn't able to pull it off. But in the process, if you look at that huge bulge of deaths and infections in the United States in September, October, November, December, and January, that was all Trump pushing as hard as he could to get people back into the workplace. And not just Trump and his Trumpy governors and whatnot around the country. And the result of that was a massive number of people dying, 500,000 people dying. The scientists look at this and said at least 400,000 of these people didn't have to die if Trump hadn't tried this as essentially his reelection strategy. So what I'm missing here, Dan, is the piece of your argument that says that the economy, what are you saying, the economy's back to normal because CNN doesn't have a death count anymore? By the way, they did this morning. They had a death count on the morning show.
Give me a second, Tom. I'll let you know what I'll say here, please. I'm just saying I live in a blue state. I live, in Jersey. It's not been fun. I run a bar, so you can imagine, what I've been through with all this. And I'm not happy about any of it, but I guess what I'm saying is that it's not all one way on this. It's both ways. And sometimes when I watch or listen to some of the media that I listen to, like Randy Rhodes and yourself, it's just like, it doesn't even...
Dan, I'm sorry. I only have 30 seconds here before we hit a break. Let me just real quickly.
Of course.
I'm arguing that the reason Rand Paul and these guys are promoting vaccine hesitancy is because they want to keep the economy off balance. What's your counter argument?
Okay, because if you remember, Cuomo said he wasn't going to trust the vaccine. Did he not?
Whatever was said at some weird point in the past
he did say
is not what's going on right now.
Just because it doesn't fit the narrative doesn't make it weird, Tom.
No, I don't remember Cuomo saying he doesn't trust the vaccines. I don't remember that, Dan.
Vaccine. Look it up. He did. But again...
Yeah, maybe he did sometime past. But I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about what happened yesterday. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So, you think I'm crazy? I see this as part of the Republican election strategy, encouraging death and disease.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently,
I mean, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So remember back in 2020 when in California, Uber and Lyft were pouring all kinds of money into Prop 22, which basically would allow them to continue claiming that their drivers weren't actually employers of Uber. They were actually contract workers. They were all independent small businesses. And therefore, the company didn't have to pay for unemployment insurance, didn't have to pay for workman's compensation if somebody got injured, didn't have to offer them any health insurance. In fact, basically couldn't even do it. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are associated and protections that you actually get, state and federal protections that you get as an employee that you do not have available to you as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, we'll hire you back. I give examples in our new video over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Larry in L.A. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, that open letter from Trump-humping retired generals and admirals, you should look it up on that and actually go through and start reading it. It's full of outright lies, Trump lies, Republican lies. It accuses the Democrats of, it accuses Biden of reversing policies of Donald Trump that were supposedly effective policies. In essence, they're accusing Biden of reversing Trump's executive orders, and they're basically trying to call Biden's executive orders illegal. And it's just full of nothing but lies, and it's obvious that it sounds like it was actually written by Sean Hannity or somebody else at Fox News.
Probably was.
It really does.
I mean, not necessarily at Fox News, but it is nothing probably. Yeah. Actually, it says that General no, that's the wrong guy. I've got the article here about it, and I thought it said who wrote the first draft of it. Yeah, I've been looking, and I'm going to track that down and read it, but. This got Boykin in it, who the guy, the anti-Muslim guy. He's now the executive director of the Family Research Council, which is one of the more notorious hate groups in the United States. It's got John Poindexter on it, who was convicted actually of crimes in the Iran-Contra affair. I think he might have been pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush. You got Army Brigadier General Dan Bolduc, who is running for the U.S. Senate from New Hampshire. It was organized by retired Army Major General Joe Arbuckle, a Vietnam vet. He acknowledged the partisan nature of the effort is not normal. This is in a conversation with Politico, but defended it as necessary given what's at stake. And this is scary stuff. What I would encourage everybody to do is make the Republicans own their record. They have given us 18 recessions in their last 17 presidential terms. They've given us 10 recessions in the last 68 years and 4 recessions in their last 4 presidential terms. We need to make them own that, and we need to make them own the fact that they are the GOP Confederate fascists of America, and we need to let them know how is it that they think that Donald Trump would win an election after 500,000 American deaths and 8 million jobs lost in one presidential term, and a recession on top of it. Why would they? I think they're proud of all this stuff, Larry. I think they're proud of it. I think that they're what you have is an authoritarian death cult. They're following. They will follow this guy. If he says jump off the cliff, they'll jump off the cliff, and some of them have. This is what Liz Cheney keeps trying to point out.
They view COVID as a war of attrition against minorities in America. That's what I agree. That's why they love it so much.
I agree. That was the whole thing around April 7th. I've talked about it. I've written about it several times. In that week after April 7th was the day that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all of the television media reported for the first time that the majority of people who were dying from COVID were black and more likely to die than white people, and that virtually all of the COVID deaths were happening in blue states with Democratic governors. And that was the week that the Trump administration decided to stop doing anything about COVID. Back to you, Larry. Sorry.
they have been fighting this war of attrition ever since Lee Atwater told us that instead of using racist terms in the past, they now can just say tax cuts, because tax cuts hurt minorities more than it does whites. It hurts whites and minorities, but because it hurts minorities more, then they're willing to fight that war of attrition also to try to get rid of the minorities in America.
Yeah, I'm with you, Larry. I'm completely with you. Larry, thank you for the call. Diane in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Hi,
how's my old hometown?
Well, I think the Republicans here in Michigan are trying to cancel the fact checkers.
Oh, yeah.
They've got a bill in the House that they want to pass. It's called the Fact Checker Registration Act.
And if you claim you're a fact checker and you're not registered, it's a $1,000 fine. Am I remembering that right, Diane?
Yes, and you have to take out proof of a fidelity fund worth at least $1 million.
Oh, really?
In case someone wants to sue you, because you have to pay all the court costs if you lose.
So only rich people are eligible for fact checkers to become fact checkers.
Yes, and it would affect the International Fact Check Network, is what they're saying.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, thank you, Diane, for the report from Michigan. I mean, it just gets weirder and weirder, right? This is welcome to the GOP. Vincent in Carson City, Nevada. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Yeah, I wanted to agree with you wholeheartedly what you said about we need to get tough and speak out, bringing up Jim Jordan of Ohio, get loud like that. We have to do that. Being calm and collected, it just doesn't work. People need passion. And do you remember what I wish you would do a lot more? Do you remember what you did? Your screener didn't remember, but a couple of months ago, you finally did it. I've been harping and thinking about this for decades, and you finally did it. You called this guy out. He was so wacko and so out there that you actually said, "You're too stupid to talk to," bye, and you hung up on him. Do you remember that guy?
I vaguely, I do. It's
you got to do a lot more of that, because these people are so far out there. They got to be held accountable, taken to task. Call them out.
Yeah, well, the thing, my principal thing, and I think this is what you're agreeing with me about on Vincent, is that, it's not callers to this show. It is the Democratic politicians somebody needs to go to Washington, D.C. and teach these guys theater. Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, I mean, these guys know how to do political theater. Donald Trump, he knows how to do political theater. There are a couple of Democrats who are pretty good at political theater. Bernie Sanders is one of them, but there's nowhere near enough. And there are no Democrats, as far as I can tell, in leadership who, Nancy Pelosi actually can occasionally do brilliant political theater, actually. But Chuck Schumer always seems to be just reading a speech or kind of bumbling around. I've never seen him really, pounding his fist and saying, he just needs to start. So, I used to make a joke about, back, I think it was during the Bush administration, about how somebody needs to get Arnold Schwarzenegger's, intercept his testosterone delivery to his governor's mansion in California and go shoot up some Democrats with it. That sounds kind of sexist, and I'm just, I'm not going to, go down that road anymore. It was funny at the time. It's not really funny anymore. But the point that Democrats need to get a spine, they need to get some outrage, they need to get some theater going, I think stands. Vincent, thank you. Thank you. I agree with you. Alex in Orange, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind?
Hey, I mean, I hate to be the materialistic guy in the bunch. I voted for Biden.
Go for it.
I was.
Doesn't matter. What do you have to say?
And no, what I have to say is, every time I got a text notification for a donation to the 11th District of New Jersey, to Biden, to Cory Booker, I gave. And then we were promised a state and local tax deduction to be restored because Trump took it off on the 2017 tax bill. So my question is, I'm all-inclusive as a Democrat. And now I see Bernie Sanders coming out in Axios saying that we don't deserve to have our state and local tax deduction back, that we should be double taxed while corporations are not. You know what? We have enough wars with Republicans. that we don't need to be fighting each other. So that man who's
I agree.
not a registered Republican.
I agree with you, Alex. I agree with you, Alex. I absolutely agree with you that the Democrats need to undo that SALT tax exemption. Right now, the bottom line here is that if you live in a high tax state, where like I think the average home value in Oregon now is around $450,000 and somewhere in that neighborhood. Well, you might pay $10,000 a year in property taxes, and on top of that, you might pay a couple $1,000s a year in income taxes. And your limit now in federal deductibility is $10,000 because of what Trump did to try to screw people in these high tax states. And there are Democrats who are saying, and other people who are saying, oh, it's only rich people who are going to be affected by this. No, it's the upper middle class, no doubt about that. But that's a lot of Democratic voters, and it was done specifically to hurt Democratic voters. I'm with you, Alex, and it was done specifically to hurt those states that have these high taxes, like California and New York.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And they have high taxes because they're offering, high quality of life, infrastructure, and good schools and things like that to their people. And Republicans want to punish that as well. Come on, let's tell the truth about this. And welcome back. Quinn in Seattle. Hey, Quinn, what's on your mind?
So I've been, for a long time I've been...
Quinn, you need to get your mouth closer to the microphone.
Yeah. So for a long time I've been kind of a crusader against neoliberalism. And I think it's always been a problem in the Democratic Party. And I would even go as far to say that during, the Reagan years, and did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. So during the Reagan years and the Clinton years even, the neoliberals were really giving a lot of ground to the conservatives that they didn't have to give, but that somehow they thought it was like on an ideological basis that they agreed with them or something. And I feel like we still haven't reckoned with that as progressives, with the neoliberals that are even still in leadership in the party. So that was what I was thinking about.
It's about half the Democratic Party is still enamored of neoliberalism, and of course all of the Republican Party. Okay.
I guess I actually had a question for you as a progressive, as a fellow progressive. What do you think we should do about it? Like, I believe that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Louise was sharing an article with me yesterday about how Republicans all across the country are running for school boards. And they're getting Republican candidates in at school boards. Democrats need to be getting people on school boards. They need to be getting them on city councils. They need to be getting them in county government. They need to be getting them absolutely everywhere, and thus providing a farm team, a basis, a group of people who have demonstrated their ability to get out there in front of a group of people and give a good speech and be viable candidates who are genuine progressives, who they can then start putting in primaries to challenge neoliberal Democrats, the same way that AOC challenged, what's his name, the neoliberal Democrat who was number 3 in leadership in the Democratic Party that she replaced. I mean, there's a formula for doing this, and it's happened a lot. I mean, there have been a bunch of progressive Democrats who have primaried neoliberal, so-called moderate or so-called corporate Democrats in the last year or two, or 3 or 4, and successfully. And the party is shifting in that direction. But it has to be built from the bottom up. It's not a matter of sitting around and complaining about it. That's not going to do any good. We need to get people, Quinn, if you think that you have any capability of running for office, or if you want to support progressives who are running for office, go, call up your Seattle Democratic Party and just say, when's your next meeting? I'd like to show up. Odds are it'll be on Zoom. You won't even have to leave your house. That's how you do it. I mean, that's how the Republicans did it. That's what they're doing. They build it from the bottom up. And it's what Democrats used to do.
And the Democrats need the long game, and I think we neglected it for too long.
Absolutely, and we need to build that infrastructure, and it literally starts with things like school boards. And the Republican Party is putting tens of millions of dollars into getting their people on school boards, for God's sake. And you know, because those school board people are the people who then run for city council, and then they run for state legislature, and then they run for the U.S. House of Representatives, and then they end up running for president. I mean, that's it. Literally, that's the path. And we need to get started with it. Quinn, thank you. Excellent question. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I will be right back with you after I read a commercial on the commercial side, and we will continue our conversation, so stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Pete in Newport, Oregon. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to disagree with you about saying that independents are not independent, and I think you're hurting.
I'm not saying all are not independent, but I think the majority of people who tell pollsters that they are independents actually probably 70, 80, 90% of the time vote for one party or the other. They really have a strong preference for one party or the other.
Well, then that could be, but like for example, I'm pro-gun, but I'm also pro-public land. I was a big Bernie supporter. I really, really didn't want to vote for Biden. I voted for Obama, I voted for Trump, and then I voted for Biden this time because that, I feel like, was the right decision at this time, just as I thought Trump was the right decision as a small business owner, thinking all of his Made in America stuff, was going to be real.
You believed his BS. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah,
that happened to a lot of Americans, Pete.
Anytime there's two people that have never been president, you have to go off what they say, and it's a gamble. When somebody's been in office, you know what they've done, which was why.
No, I get it, and I have friends who voted for Trump the first time in 2016, and because Trump was saying we're gonna stop the insane trade deals. Bernie's been saying that forever. Sherrod Brown's been saying that forever. But Hillary Clinton had not been saying that. So there were people going, okay, yeah, I'm with you. Trump was saying, I'm going to get you cheaper health care than Obamacare, and it'll be just as good. And in fact, it'll be better. Okay, cool. I'd love to see that. Trump was saying we're going to raise the minimum wage. Trump was saying we're going to raise taxes on rich people. He said, I'm going to lose friends. My friends are going to hate me over this. So yeah people voted for him in 2016. I get that. But, just because you got snookered by this guy, I guess if your point is, Pete, that there are some people who are independent, yeah, okay, I'll give you that. I'm gonna move along. But thank you for the call. Sharon in Burnsville, Minnesota. Hey, Sharon, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for being there. I just am noticing something as I get older. When I was younger, my parents were of Democratic ideals, and they moved into a Republican state. The friends told them that if they said they were Republican, they'd probably get a job, otherwise they might not. I was back for my mother's funeral, talked to another friend, she said it's still the same case. So now we're seeing this higher up where now the congressmen are hard fought to stand against something because they might be smeared too by their Republican Party. Number one. And number two, as a Democrat, I have family who vote Republican only on one issue because that's the abortion. So we need to voice the fact that we're not for abortion if you're a Democratic voter, but we want people to have the right of their own over their choices of their own body. And if they're going to keep that baby and adopt it out, then we need to have ways to help the parents do that, or ways to help a mother keep a baby. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. No, you said it very well. And you know, Bill Clinton actually used to say this well, you know, that we want to reduce the number of abortions. And the most effective way to do that is not to outlaw abortions. That just causes women to get illegal abortions and more of them to die. The most effective way to do that is to promote birth control, the widespread availability of birth control, and teach good, honest sex education in our schools. And Republicans oppose both those things. And therefore, they're driving up the rate of abortion. And Democrats used to say that out loud. And, you know, they haven't been saying that so much. And I think you're right. I think that there are these single-issue voters, or largely single-issue voters. I totally get it. Sharon, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Patrick in Lakewood, California. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was on Sirius XM. I'm sorry I'm late to the show. I was scanning through the show, and I heard you express the idea that we have to pass the HR 1 and the Voter Act.
Right. Otherwise, we're screwed. So what's your point?
Rachel did a really good piece last night on this, that even if it does pass, it goes to a Supreme Court that John Roberts, 8 years ago, passed what we had, what worked.
I know.
And he's just there saying, come on, bring it on. I know what to do with it.
It's entirely possible, too, that John Roberts feels chastened. I mean, John Roberts has been, quote, moving to the left. I would not characterize it that way, but it certainly is characterized that way by Republicans. Republicans are very unhappy with John Roberts right now. John Roberts has been the outlier in a lot of these decisions. The question is not about John Roberts, Patrick. I saw Rachel's segment last night, and she's absolutely right that John Roberts is the guy who is most responsible for gutting the Voting Rights Act. And it was a terrible, terrible decision. And whether it was done as John Roberts' partisan hack, or whether John Roberts really lives in such a bubble that he believed that because we elected a black man as president, there was no more racism in America, I don't know.
Don't forget, he has backup on that court.
But that's my point. That's where I was going. Now you've got these three Trumpies on there. And, yeah, it's going to be a real challenge. It's going to be a real fight. And you've also, Biden's commission to look at redoing the court now has some people on it from the Federalist Society who've been stacking the courts. And so it's getting more and more complex. But that means we don't stop fighting, Patrick.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at CBDistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, I mean, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air, end quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things.
But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to do a deep dive, sort of a conversations with great minds here with Sara Kamali, Dr. Sara Kamali, PhD, holistic justice activist and a scholar of systemic inequities and white nationalism at the University of Michigan, and the author of the new book, Homegrown Hate. The subtitle is Why White Nationalists and Militant Islamists Are Waging War Against the United States. Her website is Sara Kamali, SaraKamali.com. Sara Kamali is also her Twitter handle, spelled the same way. Sara, welcome to the program. Tell me first of all, your subtitle conflates white nationalists and militant Islamists as both waging war against the United States. What is the common denominator there?
Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say conflate, I would say compare. And one of the common denominators is the sense of victimhood based on their own interpretations of what's going on in the world today.
So well, feel free to fill that in.
Okay, yes, thank you. First of all, I do want to say it's wonderful to be here, so thank you for having me. And regarding the respective worldviews and the mutual sense of victimhood that both white nationalists and militant Islamists share, for the white nationalists, it's very much predicated upon immigration and people of color. Both of which are seen to be threats to not only the white race in numerical terms, but also the white race in terms of biology as well as culture, essentially. And then with militant Islamists, the sense of victimhood really comes from U.S.-led foreign policy in Muslim-majority countries. So even militant Islamists in the United States, for example, very much feel an affinity to Muslims whom they consider true Muslims, not fellow Muslim Americans, but Muslim civilians in Muslim-majority countries who are often victims of U.S.-led wars.
Would that be specifically the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one example. Then there's also in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the lack of intervention. So it's not necessarily hot wars, but the lack of intervention, for example, when it comes to the Rohingya in Myanmar. So there are a variety of issues. And one other prominent one is also the human rights abuses in Guantanamo Bay. So
right,
that is
and not to mention
local point.
Right, and not to mention the group in China that's being persecuted. It's also Muslim.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. And with white people in the United States, to put it what you said in plain English, that what you're finding is that a lot of this freak out is from white people who feel, this is Tucker Carlson's, great white replacement theory, the stuff that the Turner Diaries, it's at the core of the Turner Diaries, the novel that animated Tim McVeigh to blow up the federal building in the 90s, in Oklahoma City. Camp of the Saints, the other book that's these two big novels that are required reading, sort of like Ayn Rand is required reading for libertarians. These two books are the required reading for these white racists. They're freaked out that people of color are numerically increasing in the United States to the point that they will ultimately, quote, replace white people. Here's the thing that baffles me. If white people who are sensing some oppression or victimhood or whatever, or Muslims for that matter, who are sensing this, are going to arms, they're killing people, they're blowing things up. We haven't had so much of a problem with radical Islam in the United States, really since the first 2 years of the Bush administration, I think. But certainly, white rage is huge. Why aren't black people doing the same thing? I mean, they've been crushed for 400 years in this country, and they're among the best citizens. I mean, they're out there demanding actual democracy and justice and the rule of law, not let's overthrow the government. I mean, how is it that the group that has the greatest asset base, white people, the group that has the greatest privilege base, white people, is the group that is becoming violent, and the group, and I should probably say groups because it's not just black people, there are other minorities, Native Americans in particular, but also Hispanics somewhat, who have, and Asian American Pacific Islanders, who are like, on the receiving end of the trash, of being trashed by white people.
Targeted.
Yeah, targeted, thank you, that's a much better word, are not doing this. I mean, the closest we ever got to this was the Black Panthers, and the Black Panthers was a purely defensive, an openly purely defensive group. I mean, I suppose you could argue some dimensions of what Malcolm X's rhetoric said, taken out of context. But even there, I mean, I just, why is this what happens when majorities start losing their majorities? I mean, is there a long precedent for this?
Mm-hmm. So a few things there. Also, we need to include, well, you did mention Hispanics, but there's also the historically minoritized communities in the United States, of course, are not disparate groups. There's a combination thereof. We can, speak all day to the different combinations. But there are a myriad of minoritized groups in the United States, as you mentioned, that are targets of white nationalist violence. And as a side note, just before I begin to answer the main point of your question, Malcolm X, towards the end of his life, very much spoke to the common humanity and solidarity amongst oppressed groups. So while he's often seen as sparking the Black nationalist movement, and he did have a role in terms of his rhetoric and what he was trying to achieve at the end of his life, very much also spoke to solidarity amongst oppressed groups. With regard to why white nationalists in particular have engaged in violence, as we have most prominently seen with January 6th, it's specifically actually because of that privilege that you mentioned. So there's this sense that within white nationalism, as I discussed in the book, and I do talk extensively about the Great Replacement Theory, about the Turner Diaries, about Andrew McDonald's, which is the pen name for the author. And the idea essentially that there's something inherently, and even in some schools of thought, divinely superior about white people specifically, is what often creates this also dual narrative that there's something that needs to be protected, and there is also that is also under attack because of this special status. And it is because of this privilege that you mentioned that white nationalists are able to enact and carry out violence and express their beliefs in violent terms, whereas other groups, you know, as we've seen with January 6th, for example, and perhaps we're forgetting this now in the attempt to rewrite history of that day and the fallout since then. But Black Lives Matter advocates, for example, have been faced with a lot of militarized police presences, whereas that was certainly not the case on January 6th.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I want to continue this conversation, if it's all right with you, Sara. Can you stick around for a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're talking with Sara Kamali. Her new book is Homegrown Hate. SaraKamali.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
SaraKamali.com and on Twitter as well. We'll be right back with Dr. Kamali. And welcome back. So, Sara, tell me how Donald Trump fits into all this.
Mm-hmm. He certainly harnessed a lot of the grievances, which I discussed in the book. And we didn't get a chance, but earlier you did mention, or you did ask, whether this is essentially the latest salvo, or is this a different iteration, essentially, was the kind of the main thrust of your last question. And what we can see is that while Donald Trump has not incited any new tensions or new flames, the white nationalist rhetoric and the worldview it has been the same for decades, if not centuries, but he has certainly harnessed it for political gain, as we're very much seeing today, for example. So the way that I detail white nationalists, or that I define and categorize white nationalism within my book, Homegrown Hate, is that we have anti-government groups, we have racist groups, and then we have racist groups that have a religious expression of racism. And then there are also groups that are conspiracy theory oriented. And then, of course, a mix thereof. So those are the four primary categories. And then there's cross-pollination amongst those four. And so Donald Trump, both with his rhetoric and his policies as president, as well as since then, have certainly capitalized and exacerbated much of the anxieties within those categories of white nationalists.
It seems to me like when Trump's statements that, I don't want a black guy counting my money, I want a little guy with a yarmulke, this kind of racial hierarchy ideology that was a very prominent pseudoscience in the United States in the 1920s with the eugenics movement that was embraced by President Woodrow Wilson. I mean, we have a long history of this. You don't have to go back to the era of slavery for this. We can look at it in the 20th century. That Trump, he said those things and they got out in the press. He never walked them back. And the press didn't deal with them like, holy crap, this is part of a much larger narrative. Instead, it was dealt with like, Trump, does a rhetorical boo-boo, or,
Right.
Can you speak to that? I mean, it seems to me like those were the things that he was talking right to those white nationalists, those white supremacists.
Yes, as was often the case, as we've seen during one presidential debate when he was asked explicitly by the moderator, as well as then presidential candidate Biden, to
disavow them,
exactly, to disavow white nationalists. And then he said, stand back and stand by, speaking to the Proud Boys, and they were using that as their motto afterwards. So we can see certainly that there's not necessarily the same accountability. There are certain reasons for that, but we can also see that same lack of accountability has really been specific to Donald Trump, even with his during his candidacy and the run up to his election. So he has certainly been he has certainly been placed. His presidency certainly gave white nationalists legitimacy, both within their rhetoric and their worldviews, and within the policies of the United States.
Yeah, I get it. Sara, we got it. Hold on just a second. We'll pick up this conversation on the other side. I have to take 1 minute here and read an ad over on the commercial side, and we'll be right back with Sara Kamali. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. We're talking with Sara Kamali, Dr. Sara Kamali, who's the author of this new book, Homegrown Hate, Why White Nationalists and Militant Islamists Are Waging War Against the United States. Sara, tell me about the international dimension of this. Just a minute ago, you were talking about how so much of this is fueled by this kind of pseudoscience that has been around for centuries, perhaps millennia, but certainly even in the United States was amplified by like Woodrow Wilson and the whole eugenics movement and all this kind of stuff. This idea that white people are somehow at the pinnacle, and maybe even, there's a debate within the white supremacy movement about Asians and Jews and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but how is this happening? We see this happening in the United States. How is this playing out internationally? What does this have to do with, for example, the rise of Le Pen in France, or generally internationally? And to what extent is there a feedback loop between the international white supremacist movement and the American white supremacist movement?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So white nationalism is transnational. And the reason I argue that in the book is not only because of social media, but as we've seen and as you've mentioned eugenics, which I do discuss in the book, that we can see that eugenics, for example, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, late 1800s was actually transported from Europe as a concept to the United States, and really gave birth to Christian identity movement, which is one of the categories of white nationalism, as I discussed. So social media has certainly exacerbated the cross-pollination of ideas and the transnational nature, and as well as memberships, for example. So we can see that white nationalism as a worldview. And what I mean by white nationalism is the desire for a white ethno-state that is, government for the people, by the people, and of the people, but of white people specifically, where people of color are either non-existent or they are second-class citizens.
Basically how this country was founded.
I'm sorry, Tom, I couldn't hear you.
Basically how this country was founded.
Yes. And so that's also something that I discuss at length as well, is that why white nationalists seek to reclaim the United States in their particular vision, as we are certainly seeing today, today's events within the Republican Party, and how the Constitution, for example, is interpreted, which is very often considered to be a divine document inspired by God. So we can see today, too, that even if you look at a movement like QAnon, the transnational nature is certainly prevalent. And QAnon is within the conspiracy theory component of, or the element of white nationalism. But there is certainly a push and pull factor as well. That not only was QAnon concomitant, the rise of QAnon concomitant with Donald Trump's presidency, but then we have post Donald Trump's presidency, we have QAnon very much taking root in other parts of the world that we don't necessarily see as white nationalists, but ethno-nationalists, such as places like Japan. So how this would play out in places that see white nationalism, specifically like in Northern and Western Europe, and like in Australasia, for example, and even Canada, we have certainly the prevalence of white nationalism and very much a shared sense of grievance, as well as shared canon. So there are certain documents and books that you've mentioned, but also the motto, the 14 words, for example, that was penned in 1988. So there's a whole shared history that is cohesive because of the way that technology has been manipulated. And that, of course, we're publishing houses and all of that before, but now certainly it's been accelerated because of the way technology is being used.
Sara, we just have 1 minute until we're going to hit a hard break here and have to wrap this up. What do we do about this?
Mm-hmm. Well, several things. So it really depends on one's position. So certainly the Biden administration in the upcoming weeks will be releasing a new counterterrorism approach. And there needs to be a rethink, essentially, of the Patriot Act. There needs to be a rethink of where the funding and priorities are happening. There needs to be a rethink of, not necessarily a rethink, but there needs the prospect of a January 6th commission, a la 9/11, like the 9/11 commission, will be taken into consideration. And there really needs to be a learning of history and a learning of how race as a concept and the violent reality of racism has been leveraged in order to create and allow white nationalism to exist today.
Yeah, I totally get it. And spot on. We've been talking with Sara Kamali, Dr. Sara Kamali, holistic justice activist and scholar, University of Michigan, the author of the new book, Homegrown Hate. SaraKamali.com and on Twitter. Hang on just a second, Sara.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Sara, thanks so much for dropping by. It's been great talking with you. Thank you, and for writing a great book.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff
during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the 3 mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of secrecy breaks excuse me, important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana Godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa Godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names 2 of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, Legacy of Secrecy.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes, where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot on the table here, from what is the true nature of white supremacy. I thought that Sara's point about the international nature of this was fascinating. I have, in the course of the years that I've traveled around the world, I've gotten to know people in a number of other countries. And in 2 other countries specifically, with people who don't identify themselves as white, I have heard people express the opinion that their particular race, one was Asian, one was Middle Eastern, was the superior race. And in fact, that was the main sales pitch of, during World War II, of the whole, Tojo cult around, of Japan, that they were the superior race, the children of the sun god kind of thing. I mean, this kind of crap has been used to sell, and obviously it was what the Crusades were all about, and on it goes. I mean, this kind of crap has been used to sell nationalism, tribalism, if you will, and for political gain, more often than not, probably since the beginning of humanity. But certainly since we've had technology that allows it to really spread and to have a scientific patina, from Gutenberg's time forward. And as Sara pointed out, it's just gone on steroids. And now we're seeing this really become a major part of the political dialogue in the United States, now that well over half the Republican Party has embraced Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's principal pillar, the principal structural piece of his presidency, is white supremacy. I mean, somebody just needs to say it out loud. The Republican Party has become the party of white supremacy. It's the old Confederacy. It's what the Democratic Party was before 1965. The so-called Dixiecrats, George Wallace. Segregation now, segregation forever, right? Or whatever it is. There were 3 of them there, but you get my point. And it's poison. It's poison to a society. I mean, it might work in a small group where they're trying to create solidarity and go, oh, we're the chosen ones, we're the best people, we're these special people. Okay, fine. But when you try to impose that on somebody else, or when you say that therefore you're supposed to be in charge of the world, or at least my country, no. I'm going to stand against that. And I hope we all do. And in particular, let me speak to the white people out there. This is a poison in our community that is killing people in other communities and has for centuries. And it's time to end it. It's time to point out that the so-called science that this is based on is BS. That the politics that this is based on is the most craven, cheap, easy, lazy, sleazy kind of politics imaginable. And yet, it lives on precisely for those reasons. And that the people who have been sucked into believing this stuff, whether it is like explicit at the top of their minds, like this is the thing they talk about all the time, or whether it's just some deep thing that's way, maybe even below their level of consciousness, which frankly, I think is true of pretty much every white person. I can tell you it was certainly true of me at much younger times in my life. Before I really understood what was going on. You just assume, oh, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, whatever this is, right? That this is destroying America. And as these white supremacists and white nationalists get more and more aggressive and more organized, particularly over on Facebook, but as more and more of this comes about, it's gonna tear this country apart even harder and even farther. And then you've got outside forces, you've got other countries that don't believe in democracy, who are very offended by the fact that we have a democracy, that don't want democracy to come to their country, and so they want to discredit it here. You've got those governments openly, or in most cases covertly, frankly, funding white nationalism in the United States and in France and in Germany and in England. And frankly, all over in every so-called, democratic country in the world. Certainly in Brazil, certainly in the Philippines. Yeah, I mean, they all put their own local spin on it, but it's essentially the same thing. It's hate. It's amazing. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, what's on your mind?
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I think you and I are fairly close to in age. We likely voted from listening to you for all the many years that I've listened. We likely voted in the same first presidential election that I did in the Nixon win in '72. So we've seen the same national dynamics and community over the last, say, 50 years. And I've been scratching my head about where we're at now and what's going to happen. And two things come to mind. And I think that a president, at this point it's President Biden, but 4 years from now, who knows? But a president may need to take some extraordinary measures. And the two examples I go back to, and neither of them are any good, is first, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, which in fact went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said he was wrong, and Lincoln ignored it.
That's second correct. It's one of two decisions that he ignored. He also ignored Dred Scott.
Yes. Well, that was a good thing. But second was President Roosevelt, FDR's decision to intern, the internment decision on Japanese American citizens.
Right, which the Supreme Court actually supported.
Regrettable. Yes, a regrettable decision as we see now looking back at history. But I'm thinking, are we getting to a point where a president is going to need to take some extraordinary measure? Because sometimes there are days when I just do not see a way out of where we're at now. What do you think?
I am concerned, Israel, that that's a reflection of salvationistic thinking. The idea that one person, one agency, one magic solution is going to save us. I don't think it's anywhere near that simple. I am guessing that most of the powers that Joe Biden has as president are being used to the extent that they can be used. I am very concerned. We had a caller earlier who was pointing out, hey, even if we pass H.R. 1, it's going to immediately be appealed to the Supreme Court by right-wingers.
Exactly.
And
yes.
Will it stand? And I'm guessing that there's parts of it that probably won't stand, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we come to it. Doesn't mean you don't do the right thing right now. We are at a time of existential crisis. And I think that a lot of Americans, much like a lot of Germans in the early 1930s, are sort of, well, hey, the theaters are opening back up again and the restaurants are open and everything looks normal and you can go to church and you can go to a play and, so if everything looks normal, everything must be normal, and everything is not normal right now. Right now we are on the verge of losing democracy in the United States. And but to think that Joe Biden is going to be the one guy single-handedly who can solve this problem, misses the really powerful impact that an empowered and energized citizenry can have. And that's why, I was pointing out earlier that, Republicans have people running for school board all over the country. I mean, they're throwing tens of millions of dollars into supporting school board candidates. Democrats need to be doing the same. We need to be building an electorate from the bottom up. To you, Israel.
Yeah, I do want to say, if I may, I do want to say I do agree with you. No one person can save us. It's all of us in this together. But it is a fear that I have that one person may stand up. Now, some who think that that's the solution may think, okay, let's have Biden do it. Whereas on the other side, they're thinking, no, let our guy do that. And that may have been their thinking during Trump's presidency. But you're right. It takes all of us to save democracy.
And we all have to work. We all have to be working on this. And the stakes are high. I'll tell you, as a progressive talk show host, I mean, who was the first group of people that when Viktor Orban did in Hungary what Donald Trump tried to do here, who was the first group of people he put in jail? The left-wing talk show hosts. I mean, it's not like I don't realize I've got some skin in this game. Israel, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And Orban shut down all the progressive media in Hungary and replaced it all with, right-wing media owned by billionaire cronies of his. Sound familiar? And welcome back. Jerry in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I wanted to tell you that I've gone about what you said about coming up with like a one line that might work on reference to the Georgia turnover line. Not turnover line, I mean turn over the votes from Democrat to Republican based on what the local legislators want to do. Right. And I had this one in mind. I came up with this yesterday. Democrats and supporters of democracy, make your vote count. Don't let the anti-American Republicans steal your vote and silence your voice. Fight back. Protect your right to vote. Stop the fascist takeover of our democracy. And then maybe you could have it move into where you could have the links directly to Invisible and all the other organizations.
Indivisible, yeah.
I mean, Indivisible, I'm sorry, Indivisible. I can't even talk today.
No, I like the sentiment. And I think that we need to be calling this out as fascism, and I think that we need to be calling this out as a direct threat to democracy. And it's not like, this is a radical statement. I mean, there is.
No, this is definitely treason. I don't think it's anything but treason.
Right, and you've got Republicans saying so as well. It's just that, they get badly punished when they do so, but I'm with you. Jerry, good try. A great one. I like that. Thank you very much, and thanks for the call. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom, fascinating show. Thanks for taking my call. I want to get to the question of where the Republicans are. But as that previous caller said, we can't ignore the complicity and complacency that a lot of establishment Democrats had that gave rise to Trump. And, besides your response to him and your Hartmann report from Monday, I'd also recommend Michael Moore's Capitalism, a Love Story. That's kind of an underseen Michael Moore film. But, Tom, turning to the GOP, they're the only major party that doesn't believe in climate change. They don't believe in health care for everybody. They don't even believe in helping their constituents in times of need. Not one of them voted for this American Rescue Plan. So as you say, the only thing they have are the big lie and white nationalism. The parallels to early days of Hitler are all over the place. So besides avoiding the terrible economic conditions that helped in Germany during that time, that helped take over there, what else can we do that the opposition to Hitler failed to do back then in Germany? What can we do differently?
We can still organize. I mean, when Hitler seized power with breathtaking speed and absolute brutality, including murders. I mean, look up the Night of Long Knives sometime, when a whole bunch of anti-Hitler politicians just got killed, in one day. Hitler moved far faster than Donald Trump did. Trump had 4 years to spread poison, but he couldn't get the military entirely behind him. He couldn't get all the police behind. He couldn't mobilize the power, and maybe it's a function of how power is scattered in our government versus how it was in Germany in 1933. Frankly, I'm not enough of a scholar of the German governmental structure to know. But the bottom line is Trump never got anywhere near as far as Hitler did. He's trying, and we still have voices on the left, and we still have the ability to fight back. We still have the ability to organize, and we still have a political party, the Democratic Party, that has the potential to restore democracy in America. And that's where I think we need to be focusing most of our energy. Jeff, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote, whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that, and in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Jack in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm thinking Memorial Day's coming up, and we should remember what the greatest generation fought for. They fought the Aryan supremacists. They fought dictatorships around the world. And we see that rising here now. So let's respect their sacrifice and pay attention to this and stand up against it in any way we can. Because that's what these people are, really. They're just a new version of Nazism.
Yeah. Arnold Toynbee is said to have said that when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last great war dies, the next great war becomes inevitable. The people who remember what the first of all, the greatest generation has largely died out. And the people who remember the greatest generation, which was my father and mother, my parents, are now in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we're starting to die out. And so the generation that's coming up, the Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, et cetera, have literally no recollection of the Great Generation. The Great Generation, the World War II generation is as real to them as were the people who fought in the Civil War or the Revolutionary War. In other words, they just come out of a textbook. And so it's a tough pitch to make. It doesn't have quite the emotional punch that it would have 30 years ago, Jack. But I completely get what you're saying.
Yeah, but you should read, I think, the January 29th story in The Guardian about how Trump has been cultivated by Moscow for 40 years, and he's so stupid he didn't even realize it. But it's a January 29th issue of The Guardian. It's a short article. I think you should read that on the air sometime.
I'll check it out. Thank you very much for the call. Dean in Pomona, Kansas. Hey, Dean, what's on your mind today?
Yep. Hello. How are you doing today?
Good.
Okay. I've been following what you're saying here right along. You've been just answering every question that I've been saying. But anyway, I'm a 50-year-old white guy, and I don't get the need for white privilege. I wish I didn't have it, but I can't get rid of it. But anyway, I would like to know. I'd like for you to explain a little bit, like how the dictatorships that we have, the Philippines and the Dutertes in Poland and stuff like that. How did their democracies die and get into what they are now? Because we're on those same paths, and this is what I can't get a soul around me that I know to even open their eyes to. You know, how fragile this democracy is. How recent ours.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Dean. And at the risk of sounding self-serving, and I really don't mean this way, like I'm not trying to sell a book here, but the last book that I published is called The Hidden History of American Oligarchy. And it's about how this thing happens. How and it almost always starts with rich people corrupting the political process. And then once they have embedded themselves in the political process, and you can see this today, you've got a network of right-wing billionaires who have more employees, more offices, and a larger budget than the entire Republican Party, and they are essentially dictating the Republican Party's policies. This what used to be called the Koch network. It's now much larger than that. So basically that's where it starts, and then they use whatever tools are most effective at seizing power and putting their toadies in power. And race is low-hanging fruit. Right? It's cheap stuff. It's easy to call out to people and say, and I mean, this is why literally parts of this billionaire network are funding Spanish language radio to tell Spanish-speaking Americans that black people are, the whole reparations pitch is to try to get Hispanics to pay taxes so that money will go to black people. This is the same pitch that white people were hearing 20 years ago. It's like they're continually using race as a tool to divide people because they know that as long as we're divided, we're not going to unite against this very, very small number, this less than 1% of us who own most everything and want to keep it that way. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to essentially class warfare, if you want to call it that. It comes down to this extraordinarily brutal stuff, and it's amazing. Anyhow, Dean, thank you for the call. Eric in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We got a little less than a minute, Eric, to the end of the hour, the end of the show.
I'm trying to say this real fast. Am I just looking at things from rose-colored glasses, or does it seem like Joe Biden is playing a long game with Joe Manchin, whereas, his approval rate is up to 63% now? And do you think Joe Manchin will ever come on board? That's it.
I do. Yeah, I do. And I think you're right. I think that the way that Biden is playing this is, number one, do the stuff that people want. Number two, promise people the stuff that they want. Number three, bring Joe Manchin in by saying, I'll make you part of this big thing. And he had a meeting with Joe Manchin yesterday, and we have not heard a peep out of Joe Manchin since then. I take that as a good sign. So we'll see, Eric. We'll see. Thanks a lot for the call. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. As Bernie used to say all the time on this program, it is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Seriously, contact your local Democratic Party and ask how you can get involved. And in addition to all the great groups out there, tag You're It. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and those around you. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.